So in previous videos, we talked a little bit about the classes, which helped us define how things look like. In this video, I want to dive deeper into this because this is a really powerful concept and you should really understand how that works so that you can build efficiently in Webflow. So here's an example. When we bring in elements like this heading here or H2 or H3, you can see that they actually don't have any classes applied to them. However, they do look different. This H1 is bigger than this H2, this H3, and this default paragraph. And this is because the browser applies default styles to our element. It knows that H1 is a higher hierarchy than H2. It's more important, therefore it should probably be bigger. So it gives some default styling to these elements. But a lot of times, most of the times, we will want to additionally style them and make them look a little bit different. So one way to do this is simply, clicking on this element and then saying, hey, let me change this font to something else, right? So I've made the change here, and now I'm like, great, this looks different. I can move on with my life. But this is not the right way to do this. And here's why. You can notice that once I've made this change, Webflow actually gave a class to this element and called it heading. Now, here's what's going to happen. The next time I'm going to go ahead and insert a heading here, you will see that it doesn't have this class because it's, again, a default H1 without a class inherited to it. So one thing I can do is just go here and reapply heading, and that's great. Now I have the class applied to both of them, and I can keep making changes, and these changes are going to be, coherent throughout the website. That's great. However, I don't want to reapply, heading to every heading that I'm going. It's not very efficient. And so let me undo what I did here. And the way to edit default elements like headings and paragraphs and stuff like this is to actually click here on the style selector and then just edit the native HTML tag. So you can see in purple here, it says all H1 headings. And if I'm going to go now and basically change the font here, you can see now that it's changing even this one because this is also an H1. And if I'm going to go ahead and add another H1 here, it's going to have this same class. So this is a general note. Whenever you're editing classes of high-level HTML elements that has a default styling, like heading, for example, you want to make sure that you're doing the editing to the HTML purple classes. Now, for some elements, for example, buttons, there is no default HTML default styling to them. So we will have to give them a class name. And again, when I'm adding an element here and I want to style it, a best practice is not going to be to start making changes to how this looks and then get a random name here like a button or a heading. Then I will never remember the name of this class and I will not be able to reapply this. And then I will probably create too many classes and I won't work efficiently. I'll be slow. I'll have too much code. So you want to give logical classes names, right? Like button primary, so that you easily remember how to reapply them. Okay. So first thing you do is you click here. Now you can type in a name, for example, button main, for example, if that's how I want to call it, hit, return, and then I have a class name. Now I can start going ahead and making changes to how my button looks like. Right. Okay. So this is how I create global classes, and then I can reapply them again and again. Now, the next thing is combo classes. And this is when you want to have an element that is a variation of a different element. In this case, I want to create a primary button, but I also want to create a secondary button. Now, I do want the main characteristics of the button to stay the same, right? The same text size, the same padding, the same round corners, but I do want the background color and the outline to change to indicate that this is a less important button. So in this case, I'm adding a secondary class here, button secondary, on top of the button primary. And then I basically override some of the elements. So I override the text color. And you can see, by the way, from the styling panel, if this is an orange, this basically implies that this was inherited from somewhere. In this case, the size of the font is actually inheriting from the body. And the color is actually overriding button primary. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to retain some of the properties. Like, for example, if I'm going to add some paddings left and right to the main button, you can see that the secondary button is inheriting this, right? But some elements, like the text color and the background, are overriding the properties of the original class. Now, combo classes can only be applied on top of the class where they were created. So, for example, if I have another button, for example, and I want to reapply button secondary on top of it, and I will try to do button. You see that I only have button primary here. I cannot reapply button secondary. I have to first apply button primary, and then on top of it, you can see I have an existing combo class of button secondary. Okay, so this is how I create elements which are variations of the original class, and we'll use this a lot. So to sum up what I've been saying here, few principles to remember. Number one, whenever you can, always edit the all elements level of an element. Number two, give short and clear names to your classes so that you can remember them. And then reapply them at ease. And a number 3 best practice is when you're writing class names, don't use spaces. Webflow will actually allow you to write button space primary. However, in the actual code itself, it's going to be translated to a dash in between the words just because code itself doesn't have spaces inside. So you want to be consistent with how the code is actually written, because maybe in the future you'll refer to it in some other codes, and you just want to make sure that this is the best practice, that the way that it appears in your Webflow UI is actually how it's being reflected in the code. So just use dashes if you want to space out the 2 words within the name of the class. If this was a little bit vague, down the line in the course, you will see how we're using this until these ideas are highly cemented in your web design mind.